No fear. Nehemiah showed no fear and helped the people to do this as well. We're taking a look at chapter 4 of Nehemiah, and I gotta tell you, this is where the whole story starts to get real. Because in chapter 4, we start to see opposition. In fact, we're gonna start what I'll call the opposition arc from Nehemiah's chapters 4, 5, and 6. But as the wall starts to begin to make progress, of course, its adversaries are going to rise up. Nehemiah is going to have to respond, and he's going to have to deal with his own fear. He's going to have to deal with the fear of the people, and he's going to have to deal with an outright threat of violence from those that would try to stop this work. And that is what we're going to dive into in chapter 4. Really two different pieces here. I'm going to address both, but we'll do them one at a time because we're going to look at the opposition itself and what Nehemiah did. And we're also going to look at what happened when the work began again. What we see, though, is Nehemiah has the same playbook every time something starts to go sideways. First he prays, then he takes action. And we see that parallel even from the very beginning of this book. So let's dive in to Nehemiah chapter 4. I'm going to first read verses 1 through 14. We'll talk about that for a bit, and then I'll come back and read from 15 to the end. Now, when Sanballat heard that we were building the wall, he was angry and greatly enraged, and he jeered at the Jews. And he said in the presence of his brothers and of the army of Samaria, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore it for themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they finish up in a day? Will they revive the stones of the heaps of rubbish and burned ones at that?" Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him and said, "Yes. What are they building? If a fox goes up on it, he will break down their stone wall. Hear, O my God, for we are despised. Turn back their taunt on their own heads and give them up to be plundered in a land where they are captives. Do not cover their guilt, and let not their sin be blotted out from your sight. For they have provoked you to anger in the presence of the builders." So we built the wall, and all the wall was joined together to half its height, for the people had a mind to the work. But when Sanballat and Tobiah, the Arabs and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the repairing of the walls of Jerusalem was going forward and that the breaches were beginning to be closed, they were angry. And they all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause confusion in it. And we prayed to our God and set a guard as protection against them day and night. In Judah it was said, "The strength of those who bear the burdens is failing. There is too much rubble. By ourselves we will not be able to rebuild the wall." And our enemies said, "They will not know or see till we come among them and kill them and stop the work." At that time, the Jews who lived near them came from all directions and said to us 10 times, "You must return to us." So in the lowest parts of the space behind the wall, in their open places, I stationed the people by their clans, with their swords, their spears, and their bows. I looked and arose and said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, "Do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes." So it's starting to get real for sure. Things are starting to heat up. The enemies start with taunts. They've already tried to kind of go through diplomatic channels to frustrate Nehemiah or make him concerned that he would be accused of sedition. But now they're starting to openly ridicule the work that's being done, ridicule the people. They're starting a campaign to subtly just say to the people or spread the word that this can't be done. The materials are no good. The people aren't up to the task. There's reason to be fearful. And they're really trying to start a campaign of fear that they will come in and really invoke violence among the people. And so it's the fear that's starting to have an effect that's slowing down the work. The people are starting to have this concern about the fear. So let's break this down a little bit further. As I've said in earlier videos, I'm trying to show my homework on work I've done over the last few decades in just examining and digging into Nehemiah. And so with that in mind, each one of these chapter videos, I'm pulling from another resource as one of focus. Certainly all of them are represented in my thinking and the work I did in incorporating that into the Nehemiah Way. But for this one, I'm going to look at the dynamics of effective leadership, learning from Nehemiah, Cyril Barber. So this is an older commentary on the book of Nehemiah, and has a really good look at servant leadership. And so I'm going to use this as a little bit of background for what we're doing here. But the one thing, as I mentioned, I really view this section we're heading into, chapters 4, 5, and 6, as the arc of opposition. And Barber talks about that. I'm sure a little bit hard to see this, but a bit of a chart just showing that opposition to the work of the Lord is demonstrated in different ways in chapters 4, 5, and 6. In chapter 4, it's opposition from without, so it's external opposition. In chapter 5, we'll see opposition from within, and then in chapter 6, we're back to outside opposition again. But breaking it down a little bit further, in chapter 4, this is what we're going to see. We're going to see ridicule, and of course the recourse is prayer. Threat of violence, and of course the recourse is prayer and watchfulness. And then discouragement, and the recourse is reorganization and preparing the workers and arming them in this case. So in chapter 5, looking ahead, we'll see greed and oppression. And of course, the recourse there is to just open confrontation, restitution, and prayer. In chapter 6, we'll see intrigue, and of course, the recourse in that case is going to be firmness, is going to be solidity and prayer. And then there's innuendo. So there's this hinting at what's happening. Of course, the resource there is first open denial and then prayer. And then third, intimidation. And we see that this in chapter 4 as well, is the recourse being exemplary conduct and prayer. And so as we look at chapter 4, we'll keep an eye out for ridicule, threats of violence, and discouragement. And we'll see that Nehemiah's playbook is the same each time as it was in the beginning. Pray first, then spring into action. So a quote here to get us started: put bluntly, a powerful Jerusalem means a depressed Samaria. So, we get to why is it that Sanballat and Geshem and Tobiah are so concerned about Jerusalem? And of course, we can probably point to cultural clashes in the past. We can local kind of rivalries and so forth. But what really is evident here is just the economic interest that these parties have in keeping Jerusalem where it is. So one of the main highways linking the Tigris and Euphrates River Valley in the north with Egypt, and in the south and Philistia in the west, passes through Jerusalem. With Jerusalem once more a well-protected city, its very location will attract trade, and gone will be Samaria's economic supremacy in the land beyond the river. So this is where, we see Sanballat has a very strong interest in keeping Israel, or particularly Jerusalem, as a backwater. And so you see this campaign to try to stop things. So the first thing we see is contempt. What are these people doing? He's asking rhetorically. He's trying to showing disdain, wants to lower their self-esteem. He challenges or attacks, maligning the people for their motives. So are they going to restore the walls for themselves? So he's just implying that they're being selfish or ulterior. He's not almost not even capable of processing Nehemiah's altruistic reasons and so forth. And then, he goes through this list of things, and, we'll look at these as he goes through a very specific list of ways to kind of talk them down from doing the work. And so he has, will they sacrifice? Will they finish up in a day? Will they revive stones out of the heaps of rubbish and burned ones? So will they sacrifice? Like that's, saying, are they going to do they think they're going to be able to celebrate success here and have sacrifices at the end of this process? Will they finish up in a day? It's like, he's talking about how long is it going to take? It's like, well, we started this project how long ago? Well, it's been a minute. right? It's been a long time because big projects take a long time, projects of this scale. And he's saying, what, is this going to take a day? No, he's saying it's going to take months. It's going to take years. It's going to take decades. It's never going to happen. And of course, God will prove him wrong in just 52 short days. Will they revive stones out of the heaps of rubbish and the burned ones at that? So we're going to be talking about the limestone here. When Babylonians came through, they not only did they knock the walls down, they burned everything. The limestone was very susceptible to heat, so the materials broke down. And so he's really pointing the fact that even the materials may not be up to it. So Tobiah now gets in on the action. If a fox goes up, he will break down their stone wall. Later, we're going to get to see the people literally marching on top of the wall during the celebration when they are finishing up in a day, in day 52, or their sacrifice and celebration. These kinds of things start to happen, and they really refute all the things that have been said here. So pretty exciting. It will be fun to look back when we get to that part. As always, we see Nehemiah address adversity with prayer. So he starts with prayer. This one, though, controversial prayer in the Bible, because he literally seems to be raining down a curse on the people that are opposing him, and literally calling on a curse that really reflects the experience that the people of Judea experienced, being taken away, being plundered as a nation and a people. And so, very controversial for sure. We really see Nehemiah almost reflecting God's wrath. And it's the same wrath that was pointed at the people that caused them to be taken into captivity themselves. And now we see this pointing forward. So a little more here from Barber, just talking about this controversy around the prayer and just some of the things commentators have done to try to address the kind of the nature of this, which seems a little bit disconcerting. Some writers have tried to rationalize their way out of this problem by resorting to the original text. They claim that the verbs were predictive instead of imperative. This explanation, however, fails to stand up under closer examination, and so goes through some examples there. Some other views. Second attempt to explain these imprecations tries to exonerate God from any part of the prayer. Those that hold this view take refuge behind the fact that inspiration of scriptures guarantees only the accurate recording of what was said and not necessarily imply divine approval. So there are different views on that perspective. Still others point to the fact that during this time period in this region, it was not uncommon to invoke a deity and invoke curses from a deity on people that they didn't like. And so that's pointed to as a reason. Of course, recognizing it's not congruent with some of the attitudes that Christ presents in the New Testament, loving your neighbor and so forth. And so, the author, points to the challenges with that perspective. So the author here just starts to point to some things that maybe seem a little bit more feasible, just theologically and just even practically from what we know, the character of God. Described a scenario where students asked a theologian about this topic, and the answer was most revealing. You have to be a very spiritual person to pray that kind of prayer. In applying this context of Nehemiah's prayer, he finds that Sanballat and Tobiah, in deprecating the work, were in fact holding up to scorn and ridicule the God of the Jews. So he's openly challenging the wrath of God by despising him before the builders. So this is where we see this connection point. This author at least proposing what Nehemiah is addressing. The fact is they aren't just scorning Nehemiah or the people that are doing the work. They are deliberately rebelling or speaking against God. So it closes this part out with the only satisfactory answer to these questions lies in the personality of the leader. As Bernard Montgomery so wisely pointed out, a leader must have an infectious optimism and determination to persevere in the face of difficulties. He must radiate confidence, relying on moral and spiritual principles and resources to work out rightly, even when he himself is not too certain of the material outcome. So to close that point up, Barber says, so successfully does Nehemiah counter the evil influence of Sanballat and Tobiah that he can write in his diary, so we built the wall, and the whole was joined together to half its height. So this half its height is really interesting and important. I've said before, what this is starting to show is that there was a phased initiative that happened here. The project was massive. One of the things that Nehemiah did first was he reduced the scope. He didn't try to put a wall around the entire city, only a segment of it where most of the activity and the people were. And then the next thing he did was he divided it into many, many segments. We have 46 segments. But he also phased the project, and we see it here because he says here, we finished the wall, we closed all the gaps to half its height. So I think there were a number of reasons why it was done this way, because I think Nehemiah wanted to make sure that they at least reached a first phase of the project all the way around. I think some of the most challenging parts of building the wall would have been in the first 4 feet, because they would have had to dealt with pieces of the wall that were still there. They would have had to dealt with different problems in the foundations and all those kinds of things. But then there's also just the matter of if each group on average had maybe 300 feet or so of wall, some might be able to build more quickly. Some may have easier sections and harder sections. And so by setting a point where the half height as the first phase of the project, it would allow them to redeploy those that finished sooner to those that finished later and really bring the whole wall up to level. It would make the second phase of the project much easier. It also would give them a natural point to regroup if they needed to. And finally, I also think it gave them a much more defensible position when they start to experience outright violence, which is what's coming next. Okay, so now we see really the conflict is escalating. We're moving from just like creating a fear of violence to, really preparing to attack on the part of these players. Literally, and there's a map in the Nehemiah Way that shows just the kind of the geopolitics here. Jerusalem is surrounded, and you have Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem, and now you see the Ashdodites getting into the mix. We have, really the surrounding of them. So just, jumping back into Barber here for a minute, when the enemies of the Jews find that their ridicule and threats have failed to stop the workers, they turn to violence. They completely surround those in Jerusalem. There's Sanballat to the north, Tobiah and the Ammonites to the east, the Arabs to the south, and the Ashdodites, and that's the ancient Philistines, to the west. So we really see it's almost like the walls are closing in. Quite literally, as they're building a wall, the walls are closing in on them, and the people are naturally getting concerned and fearful, and some of the word war is starting to now seep in when they start to see violence maybe on the horizon. And so, going back here, what does Nehemiah do? Well, of course, first Nehemiah prays, and then he takes action. And we prayed to our God and set a guard as a protection against them day and night. So, really it's not just, obviously praying, trusting God, but then also saying, okay, everyone needs to arm themselves. We need to set a guard. We need to pull everybody into the city. We need to be able to continue the work and continue to fortify our position. In Judah, it was said, the strength of those who bear the burdens is failing. There's too much rubble. By ourselves, we will not be able to rebuild the wall. Our enemies has said they will not know or see till we come among them and kill them and stop the work. So now we see it's not Sanballat and the outside forces saying this is pointless or this is dangerous. The people are starting to hear this, to absorb this, to take this idea on as their own thinking. And so now we're really starting to see it having a demoralizing effect. At that time, the Jews who lived near them came from all directions and said to us 10 times, you must return to us. So now not only are the people kind of hearing these things from afar, but even people coming in to say, you got to get out of here. This is going to go badly. And so you really see the influence of those who live closer to these adversaries are bringing in this message. So let's look now at Nehemiah's response. So in the lowest parts of the space behind the wall, in the open places, I stationed the people by their clans, with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles and to the officials and the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. And so in this way, first, he's taking action. He's getting everything fortified. He's putting people together in groups by families and by those that are really going to fight shoulder to shoulder to protect each other and themselves and of course, their families directly behind them. This is where we see where they were working on the wall was near their homes. But he's also then, on a campaign to correct the course. He's dealing with the crisis by reminding everyone that we are not just fighting in flesh and blood. We have a powerful God behind us. And he also reminds them that they are in a position to not just defend the work, but they're defending their brothers, their family members, their wives, their children. And so he's really rallying everyone at this point, not as workers, but as an army. And so Nehemiah shifts from the role of overseer or foreman for the project and becomes the general. So the first half of this chapter, we start to really see the stage being set for what is going to be open conflict, real violence. We're going to see, really a lot of action at this point. And that's something we don't usually think about in the book of Nehemiah. And yet we see these are battle lines being drawn, people rising up and arming themselves, really the different forces coming to a point where they're likely to clash. And of course, this would really have negative implications for everyone if the Persian government felt like there was a risk or destabilization in the region. So a conflict is actually probably not desirable, certainly not for Nehemiah, but actually not for Sanballat, Geshem, and the others as well. But at the same time, their anger is getting the better of them, and we see it coming together. So with this, now we see Nehemiah trying to right the ship. And so in the second half of chapter 4, we see the work coming back online, everything getting started again. So let's dive in. I'm going to read through the rest of the chapter, and then we'll break it down. When our enemies heard that it was known to us and that God had frustrated their plan, we all returned to the wall, each to his work. From that day on, half of my servants worked on construction, and half held the spears, shields, bows, and coats of mail. And the leaders stood behind the whole house of Judah, who were building on the wall. Those who carried burdens were loaded in such a way that each labored on the work with one hand and held his weapon with the other. And each of the builders had his sword strapped at his side while he built. The man who sounded the trumpet was beside me. And I said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, the work is great and widely spread, and we are separated on the wall, far from one another. On the place where you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. So we labored at the work, and half of them held the spears from the break of dawn until the stars came out. I also said to the people at that time, let every man and his servant pass the night within Jerusalem, that they may be a guard for us by night and may labor by day. So neither I, nor my brothers, nor my servants, nor the men of the guard who followed me, none of us took off our clothes. Each kept his weapon at his right hand. So now we see, once the direction is set, the fortifications are in place, in a sense, the threat was deterred because what Sanballat and the army of Sanballat could really see, the Samaritan army could see that this was not going to be a simple fight. This was going to be an all-out battle, and they really weren't ready for that, or they weren't up for that, or even in spite of the threats. So Now what we see is, okay, the immediate threat was brought to a halt, but now Nehemiah is putting systems into to really solidify what they've done to address this opposition. So we see this effort of getting, dividing the workforce so that you have those that are ready to fight, or at least ready to help everyone get ready to fight, and those that are actually doing the work. Even those that are doing the work are armed. They're having weapons on their person so that if they need to fight, they're able to. And then you also see Nehemiah calling for reinforcements. A lot of times I've always thought of the idea that everyone was living in the city, but a lot of people were in the surrounding areas and were spread out. And so Nehemiah is saying, come into the city, we need reinforcements. In a sense, they needed twice as many people because now they needed to stand a guard, and they needed to get the work, keep the work moving forward. And we don't really see the work slowing down. When it resumes, it seems to be back on its full pace. You do see it get to completion in 52 days. So what the implication here is that they brought in enough more people, they were able to continue the work at a very similar pace. But almost like the standard operating procedures changed. Probably worth mentioning here, I mean, we see real evidence of standard operating procedures, SOPs here. Nehemiah has really identified not just how we're going to build the wall and the work to be done, those kinds of things, but how are each of the individuals outfitted? They're all carrying a sword. Their operating procedure is that they're armed while they work. There are certain people who are designated to bear arms and to kind of have arms at the ready for those that are doing work. So really everyone's at a state of heightened alertness, and security is now something that's on high. And so that's basically keeping, now that they've kind of stabilized the threat of attack, they're making sure that threat doesn't return quickly if they let their guard down. And so those SOPs, standard operating procedures, become a key component of this. They were already there in terms of how we're going to build the wall, but it was also how we address the environment and how we respond to the environment at the same time. Maintaining readiness is the other thing that we see here, and this is really where it's a state of just always keeping on task and on target, and you really see that. So neither I, nor my brothers, nor my servants, nor the men of the guard who followed me, none of us took off our clothes. Each kept his weapon at his right hand. And so a couple of things. So this is even when they sleep, they're staying in their clothes. They're ready to fight. They're ready to work. Everyone is all in, as we talked about in chapter 3. And there's really a sense of we're not letting our guard down for even a single second. I think this is going to be interesting too. We see a little bit later when Nehemiah is shaking out his clothes to make the point to some of the people that are exploiting others in the next chapter is, he's showing like he's been wearing these same clothes for a long period of time. There's dust. He's been working. He's maybe been fighting. There maybe been skirmishes, and he's really in it. And we see that demonstrated as well. So before we wrap up, just one thing to look at here in Barber again is just really, dealing with people being demoralized. In the church today, there are so many times where all of a sudden morale kind of turns sour. Maybe that there's a controversy in the church. It may be that there's infighting. There may be some kind of a direct problem between a few people that start to affect others and can really kind of take away the spirit of just the connectedness and that sense that of optimism. So in the passage before us, Nehemiah undertakes the task of cheering the dispirited workers. Their own leaders are no help. Sufficient to say that Nehemiah was able to overcome their fear by means of his own enthusiasm. And just jumping ahead, his confidence in God of the covenant gives him an infectious optimism, which is the very essence of successful motivation. And so this is where, our own discouragement, our own lack of optimism or enthusiasm can have a negative effect on those that we're leading. But also it's like the opposite. This can be the thing that helps to break out of some of those patterns and some of those negative feelings. So just to kind of bring it to a close here, pursuit of ideals, as it's listed here, when Sanballat realizes that his subtle psychological warfare is no longer having the desired effect, he plans an all-out offensive. So, this is where, when the enemy is foiled, of course, that then leads to what can be even a stronger attack or even more of a desperate scenario. And this is where Nehemiah's efforts to not just address the immediate threat and concern, but also to put measures in place to ensure that these don't return as a problem. And so this is where addressing the immediate problems of fear and concern and morale, but then also taking steps to inspire people in optimism, and then start to address the underlying root cause issues that might result in this things coming back. And so making sure that those are addressed. So the author wraps it up this way: Nehemiah's faith in the one who called him to undertake this task also gives him enthusiasm. And his enthusiasm helped him to turn a potentially disastrous situation into a unifying situation. And this is where sometimes it can be easy to look at adversity or problems or challenges as those that are just really, don't have any redeeming value. But God may be using these situations to actually unify us. And we see that happening here, where Nehemiah is using the opportunity to bring more people in to get more kind of connectedness, but also then unifying everyone and creating that sense of solidarity that's going to allow them to not only kind of step away from their fear and the adversity that's in front of them, but to return to the focus of the mission, which in this case, the project is to build the wall and ultimately building God's kingdom. So that's Nehemiah chapter 4. A lot of exciting stuff happening. We're in the first of the 3 chapters in what I call the arc of opposition. And next time we're going to dig into the opposition that comes from within. And sometimes that is the hardest kind of opposition to deal with. And so really looking forward to diving into that. If you're finding these videos useful, please make some comments below. If you have questions, throw those in there as well. Love to have some interaction. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It helps helps me to continue to do what I'm doing. You can also pick up a copy of the book, The Nehemiah Way, if you want to just get into more of the tactical ways we can apply these truths that are revealed in Nehemiah in activating and motivating and mobilizing people in the church, not just to volunteer, but to be leaders and really coming together in the mission that you have heard you're calling from God as a church. Stay tuned for the next video. We'll be taking a look at chapter 5 and looking at opposition from within.